In part 2, we will look in more detail at the nature of modern money and what it means. We will consider the important question whether we can actually trade Bitcoin or not. And we will look at the role played by scholars when they look at whether Bitcoin is halal or not. So now we can look at modern currency, and the question I always ask is, do scholars understand real money today? And there's no doubt that some scholars do, but I think the majority of them, they probably do not have a strong grasp of economics in terms of money and velocity and circulation, and especially with money creation. So what do I mean by this? I mean modern money is, if we assume it's real, I think this is the main argument that's made, is that modern money is real and Bitcoin is not real. It's not tangible. You can't touch it. You can't hold it. And so these are some terms that scholars use. But in reality, I mean, modern money is, so if you imagine notes and coins to be, modern real money, right? So in the UK, for example, the amount of notes and coins compared to the whole of the money supply is 3%. And each country will be different, of course, but I imagine for many economies that are quite, reasonably advanced or functioning, that you can look for your own country, what proportion of total money supply is made up of notes and coins. So in the UK it's 3%. So what does that mean? It means 97% is not real, right? It's not tangible. You can't touch it. So when scholars have the view that you can't touch Bitcoin, and so it's questionable whether it counts as currency or not, the same applies for 97% of modern currency. You can't touch it. I mean, in fact, once you look at how this is created, it actually poses many problems in terms of Sharia. It is created by mainly by banks, right, through credit creation. So this is not even created by governments and central banks. And when it's created by credit creation, this means these are loans, right? And so when this money or currency is created by loans, it attracts interest. Right? So then you have the issue that you have money which is deemed to be physical, but actually 97% of it is not physical, and this 97% is actually created at interest, which is riba. Right? So this is why I question that when scholars do make the big difference between modern money and tangible money today, and Bitcoin not being tangible, I really ask whether they do understand the nature of modern money. But of course, the biggest argument then in favor of using this as legal currency is that it's customary. Right, it's accepted, it's issued and backed by the governments, and sometimes using something as a currency, if it's customary and it's used, and if it's legal tender, then sometimes these are enough to make a currency Sharia compliant. But my point is that even though it is customary, you have to issue that 97% of it is issued at debt and issued at riba, and it involves interest. Okay, so we've talked a bit about Bitcoin being a currency, and it's a split of opinion. Some scholars have said yes and some scholars have said no. So now let's look at Bitcoin as an asset, as a commodity. So can we trade Bitcoin? So this is a different question to Bitcoin being a currency, right? So you can still trade something even if it's not a currency. So for example, with Bitcoin, so the first question to ask is it a currency or not? And there's a difference of opinion, and quite a few scholars say it's not, for the reasons that I've given. And even, some scholars say it is okay to be used as a currency. But even, whatever the answer to this is, we have a different question, that is Bitcoin does it qualify as a commodity? Right? Does it qualify as a commodity or an asset? Like, is it Sharia compliant? And if it is, then we can buy it and trade it, we can invest in it. If it's not, then we can't buy it at all. We can't do anything with it, never mind use it as a currency. So here in some ways, this question is the crux of the issue, right? Is it halal or not? So then we come back to the issue, as I mentioned earlier, what is halal and haram? So here, we're not talking about key issues of faith and belief. So in fiqh al-ibadah, where issues of halal and haram have largely been settled, right? So we're here talking about fiqh al-mu'amalat, which is to do with areas outside of religion, outside of belief, and especially in this area, we're talking about areas of commerce, commercial law, right? And here, there are some. So in commercial law here, it's largely on opinions, right? There are some clear rules of contract, for example, in what constitutes a sale contract or a leasing contract, what constitutes investment and partnership, and so on. But here, when it comes to currency, especially modern currency, this is an area of opinion. So this means scholars have to do ijtihad, right? And this is very common in modern economic areas, because we're coming across new situations that had not existed before, especially with currency and money and Bitcoin and crypto and tokens and so on. So what does that mean? It means that it means you have to ask somebody. You have to ask a scholar his opinion, right? And he will give his opinion. You know, if he's a mufti, he can give an opinion. He's not obliged to. He can say it's halal or haram, or really, you know, he can say I don't know. It's permissible to say that, right? So this is what a scholar would say. And this applies also to a body of scholars, right? You can ask a body of scholars. So whether the bodies, I mean, sometimes they're associated with central banks, sometimes with governments, and sometimes they're independent religious bodies. So the body of scholars will give the same opinion, right? It's permissible or it's not permissible. But either way, whether it's a scholar or a body, this is an opinion, right? It has certain standing. If you follow that opinion, then, you know, you can class it as halal or haram, and you can follow the opinion, but it's just an opinion. So it means that if body 1 says it's halal, you know, body 2 could say it's haram, and they will each have their basis and their ruling for it, right? So the point is that there's no clear answer. If Bitcoin is halal or haram, it just depends on who you ask, and that's the same with many things in modern business and commerce and trade. And financial contracts. It just depends who you ask. So if you're looking for an answer, is Bitcoin halal or not? You know, yes, tick yes here or across here. No, there's no answer for you. It really depends who are you asking and whose opinion are you taking. And once you take that scholar or the body's opinion, then that's exactly what you're doing. You're taking that scholar's opinion. Then, you know, if you hear an opinion that, for example, just for argument's sake, let's say Bitcoin is halal. If you hear this opinion and then you turn around and say to everybody, well, did you know Bitcoin's halal? You know, that's not the correct thing to say. You have to say that, you know, there's been a reasoning by a certain scholar or a certain body to say it's halal. And the same thing if scholars pronounce it haram. You know, then you can't turn around and say Bitcoin is haram. You have to say, you know, who's given this opinion? And there should be reasonings behind that opinion. You know, but other scholars could have an exact opposite opinion, and they're equally correct and equally wrong. You know, one is not more correct than the other. And I would question that, you know, when you look at the the quality of the opinions, you know, it comes back to the issue of how well do the underlying scholars or bodies understand modern economics? How well do they understand money and banking and finance and contracts? How well do they understand blockchain and the central ledger and crypto and Bitcoin? How well do they understand all these? In part 3, we will look further at whether it is halal or not to trade Bitcoin. We will look at some of the different ways that you can invest or buy Bitcoin and whether these are halal or not. And also, we will look at some of the ways that these products are marketed and what steps we can take to try to protect our investment.